Pete Buttigieg has been a more attractive candidate than a lot of the Democratic candidates, specifically because he hasn't done this, because he has suggested that people in the middle of the country who don't buy into the far left agenda may not be monsters, because he has said, yeah, you know what, I disagree with the founder of Chick-fil-A, but I'll still eat their chicken. And that was like the most sane thing anyone has said in this entire presidential election cycle. Well, he basically threw that over yesterday. He was talking about evangelical Christians, and he said any evangelical Christian who votes for Trump is violating their religion, which is somewhat rich coming from a guy who believes in abortion until point of birth. Right? This is somebody who believes in the idea that a man is not a man and a woman is not a woman. He believes in the sort of transgender rights agenda. And Buttigieg is not exactly famous for believing in traditional Judeo-Christian moral standards when it comes to things like abortion. Here he was talking about his own life, and after castigating evangelicals as being bad Christians, which he's been doing the last couple of weeks, he then suggests that evangelicals have an outsized hatred of Buttigieg because he's gay, which is absurd. I've seen none of this from the right, like legitimately none. But here he is going after Mike Pence and attributing motives to Mike Pence that do not exist. I want to talk about this for a second because I think it's important.
When I was younger, I would have done anything to not be gay. If you had offered me a pill to make me straight, I would have swallowed it before you had time to give me a sip of water. Thank God there was no pill. The thing I wish the Mike Pences of the world would understand, that if you got a problem with who I am, your problem is not with me. Your quarrel, sir, is with my creator.
Okay, so this is just, it's such a way to malign Mike Pence. Mike Pence has been dealing with gay people like his entire career. This idea that Mike Pence sits around at night and thinks about the bad gays. Where are you getting this? Legitimately, where are you getting this? And it's always confusing to me when purportedly religious people, and especially secular people, somehow put it on religious people that religious people sit around all the time fulminating about the gays. That's not the case. That's simply not the case. The argument that Buttigieg is making there, by the way, is an irreligious argument. The argument that he is making there is because he has a biological drive to be gay, which is something that I fully accept, by the way, that homosexual orientation is largely, if not entirely, genetic. I'm totally fine with that idea. I don't think that the science proves that it is entirely genetic. It is a combination of environmental factors and biological factors. Twin studies tend to show that if one identical twin is gay, only about 50% of the time is the other twin gay, which suggests that there is a genetic component, but it is not entirely genetic in all cases. There's probably a spectrum. That's fine. Doesn't matter. From a religious perspective, the religious perspective on homosexual activity is the same as the religious perspective on adulterous activity, the religious perspective on premarital sexual activity. The perspective is that you have a biological drive to do X does not mean that you can do X in a moral, non-sinful sense. That is not a judgment of Pete Buttigieg. That has nothing to do with Pete Buttigieg as a human being. And the argument that if I think that homosexual activity is a sin, that somehow I am anti-God is such a bizarre argument. Like, people have natural drives to do all those things all the time. Like, every man has an evolutionary biological drive. Every straight man has an evolutionary biological drive to impregnate as many women as possible. If I say I don't want you to impregnate as many women as possible, am I now anti-God because God also made that drive? It's a bizarre argument. But the more bizarre argument is the one that Buttigieg is making, which is that Mike Pence is sitting around thinking about him. I guarantee you, Buttigieg spends more time thinking about what Mike Pence thinks about Buttigieg than Mike Pence spends time thinking about Buttigieg. This is one of the weirder things in our modern American politics. It was interesting. I was on Joe Rogan's show the other day, and Joe and I are friends. And Joe and I were talking about same-sex marriage. And I said, I'm libertarian on this issue. I don't think that the government should be involved at all on same-sex marriage. I don't think the government should be involved in marriage at all, period. I'm a religious person. My religious marriage matters to me. I don't care what the state's standard of marriage is because, frankly, who the hell's the state to legitimize my marriage or not legitimize my marriage? I don't care. I think that the state should be irrelevant in this, which would put me on the same page in terms of policy as most people on the left when it comes to same-sex marriage. I don't think the state should be involved in this stuff. And then Joe started asking about my moral views on homosexual activity. So I told him, and all I could think of during the interview was, why does anyone care? Like, if you care about my moral view, I'm happy to tell you about my moral view. But why is it relevant to your life? I'm not telling Buttigieg what he can and cannot do. I'm not saying the government should do anything to Buttigieg. And the same thing is true of Pence. You think Pence has never met a gay guy? But the left needs to castigate people with whom it disagrees as morally inferior, as bad, as ungodly. I've never heard Mike Pence say one word about Pete Buttigieg or suggest that Pete Buttigieg is ungodly or unchristian. And that's exactly what I've heard from Pete Buttigieg about a bunch of people on the right who happen to be Christian, about people who happen to be religious and disagree with him about the sinfulness or non-sinfulness of particular activity.